In this lesson, we're looking at cellular respiration, which is a pretty dense topic. We've got a lot of things to cover here, but it is quite a complex process. So we already know that the main types of molecules that exist in a cell, we've got our lipids, our nucleic acids, our carbohydrates, our proteins, and the sum of the chemical reactions that our body undergoes to break them down or build them up or whatever it is known as metabolism. So we can categorize reactions within our metabolism as catabolic or anabolic. So anabolic builds smaller molecules onto bigger ones, so little Lego blocks into big things, and catabolic does the exact opposite, it breaks them down. So in this lesson, we're specifically looking at the reactions involved in making energy in our body through the processes of cellular respiration. Now, cellular respiration is a controlled release of energy from organic compounds to produce ATP. And recall that ATP is adenosine triphosphate, which is our cell's energy currency. So essentially, our cells are breaking down organic molecules to make energy. And we're talking food here. So in that case, it could be carbs, lipids, mainly for energy, sometimes proteins, amino acids. Plants use lipids or carbs that they've previously created during photosynthesis as well. So this is a function of life that exists in every single cell. And we're talking muscle cells, maybe they need to get their glucose, they go through cellular respiration to gain H12O, CO2 and energy so they can actually contract. Okay, so it's happening in all cells and tissues. Now, if we look really, really closely at ATP, it has a nitrogenous base, meaning it's got nitrogen as its base. It's just like DNA in that respect, but it's also got a ribose sugar attached to it and 3 phosphates that you can see there that are the P's. Now, the third phosphate ion in ATP has a really high energy chemical bond, so it has really high chemical potential energy, and ATP is made by charging up ADP. And it's used as energy when we actually cleave off. So we snap off that extra phosphate and that releases the energy from the bond to be used elsewhere. So interestingly, ATP doesn't actually move between cells. That means that cells need to have this continuous supply of energy being created in the mitochondria, and we need to be able to recharge. So we need to be able to eat and bring all those organic molecules in to keep creating ATP. Now, ATP serves many, many functions, all right? It's needed to make macromolecules, to transport things across the membrane. We know we have active membrane transport, as well as transporting within cells. Now, energy comes from splitting that ATP to create the ADP, and energy is used and lost to the environment as heat so that it can't be really reused at all. So it can be really hard to wrap our head around the idea with all these energy transformations happening. We need to be able to explain how ATP allows energy from these reactions to be used to build things up again. So to create ATP, the body must break down glucose in a catabolic reaction. So it's a big glucose molecule breaking down into a smaller one. Then the ATP, its high energy bond is broken, it releases that energy, which once again is a catabolic reaction, still breaking things down. And then this energy, as well as all the smaller molecules created as breakdown products in this process, can be used to build up other molecules that the body needs. So meaning we're creating something through catabolic reactions and then using the products of that to build things up in anabolic reactions. So we're talking monomers to macromolecules or something. So it's like breaking down your kids' Lego building, using the pieces to rebuild something completely new, and that's really the true cycle of life. So the chemical reactions involved in cellular respiration are incredibly complex, okay? And they happen in stages, and our goal is to understand and eventually describe the basics. And we need to see the bigger picture first of what the overall picture is, and then we need to break it down into stages. And specifically we're looking at the location, inputs and outputs of each of these stages. So that's what we need to focus on here, and that's how we're going to talk our way through it, okay? Overall, we're looking at a process that occurs both in the cytoplasm and in the mitochondria, and we're inputting glucose and oxygen into the system to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of ATP. So that's our overview of the process. There's the locations, there's our inputs, there's our outputs. Our first stage is known as glycolysis, and it occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. And this is because the glucose molecule is actually too large to pass through the outer membrane of the mitochondria. So the goal of this process is to break down that really big glucose molecule into 2 molecules of pyruvate. So it's pretty, basically snapping things in half. The process actually needs ATP, funnily enough, as energy to start off with. So it breaks down the glucose and it produces a net gain of 2 ATP molecules. And you'll see these types of molecules and all of these reactions here, these ones that have just popped up, and they're known as hydrogen carriers, right? Because they're picking up and moving around hydrogen. So hydrogen atoms that pop up in the exchange of all these atoms, they're going to keep moving around. So you'll see them in grey here. Now glycolysis, very first step, regardless of what happens after that, it's always about getting ATP in the system to break down that big glucose molecule, so eventually those pyruvate molecules can pass into the mitochondria. Okay, our next reaction is called the linking reaction. It's the next stage, it's the bridge between that cytoplasm and the mitochondria stage. So the pyruvate that was broken down, so this is actually happening in the mitochondria now. The pyruvate that was broken down from glycolysis is going to be entering into the mitochondria, so that's our first input. And the reaction that occurs inside is essentially removing carbon dioxide or CO2 from the molecule as a waste product. So this is where our waste products start coming in. It uses an enzyme to convert 2 carbon molecules, so the pyruvate, to acetyl-CoA and some hydrogen. So that's what we're getting out of it here. And remember that hydrogen is picked up by our NAD, so our hydrogen carrier. That's what we need to understand here, is that we've moved our pyruvate into the mitochondria and then we start going through these chemical processes. The Krebs cycle is our third cycle, and it happens once again, we're still in the mitochondria, and it's also known as the citric acid cycle. You might see it written there. So the acetyl-CoA was created in that last set of reactions, okay, and all of this is being directed by enzymes the whole time. Now water molecules are added to the system. This is an addition, and eventually carbon dioxide waste product is produced, and alongside there's these 2 unchanged enzymes, okay. They were involved in it, but remember they don't change after their reaction has been done. They essentially do their job and then leave. So we've got some hydrogen carriers that are also being picked up and moved around here, and we also have 2 ATP molecules that are produced here. Now the Krebs cycle is incredibly complex, and it's really challenging to break down into simple biochemical steps for our purpose, unfortunately. So this is one of those ones we're just going to have to kind of remember our main players. All right, last stage, we're still inside that mitochondria, and this is our electron transport chain, and it's occurring in the inner mitochondrial membranes, and there's all these enzymes embedded into the membrane to assist in the reactions. So hydrogen ions are being released once again from their carriers, as well as high energy electrons, which are used to form this ATP. Now there's some additional oxygen is required here, which is why that is part of an input in the system, and these combine with really low energy electrons and the hydrogen atoms to form water. Okay, this is technically a waste product in this situation, that water is a waste product, but you know that our body is going to use it in some way. So depending on the conditions of the reaction, so whether it's taking place in oxygen or no oxygen, will depend on how many ATP molecules are created, as well as many other things. So our electron transport chain here, again, extremely complicated. So for every 1 glucose molecule that is broken down in this process, there are 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules released, and about 36 ATP molecules, okay? Very, very complex process here.